"Put your hands behind your back, ma'am," the officer said, loud enough for every person in Whitmore Pharmacy to hear. Evelyn Carter stood frozen beside the prescription counter, one thin hand resting on the edge of the glass, the other clutching a wrinkled insurance card that had already been declined twice by a blinking computer screen. She was 74 years old, 5'3" in her Sunday coat, with silver curls tucked beneath a navy church hat and a paper bag of heart medication sitting open on the counter in front of her. She had not raised her voice. She had not stepped past the register. She had only asked the pharmacist to check the name on the bottle again. But Officer Mark Reynolds had already decided what he saw. An elderly black woman. A missing payment. A manager pointing from behind the counter. That was enough for him. "Sir," Evelyn said softly, her voice careful in the way life had taught her to be careful, "that prescription isn't mine. And it isn't safe." The pharmacy went still. Not quiet, exactly. The refrigerator humming near the flu shot sign kept buzzing. A receipt printer clicked somewhere behind the counter. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement from a morning rain that had left the parking lot shining like black glass. But the people stopped moving. A mother pulled her little boy closer beside the cough syrup aisle. An old man lowered his newspaper. Claire Whitmore, the pharmacy manager, stood behind the counter with her lips pressed tight and her face too pale for someone who claimed she had done nothing wrong. On the floor near Evelyn's shoe, a white prescription bottle had rolled out of the paper bag, its orange cap bright beneath the fluorescent lights. The label did not say Evelyn Carter. It said Daniel Price, age 8. Evelyn saw it. Her nurse's eyes saw it before anyone else did. The dosage. The warning sticker. The wrong name. The wrong patient. Something cold moved through her chest that had nothing to do with her heart condition. "Officer," she whispered, looking past Reynolds toward the little boy by aisle 3, "please listen to me. That child may have the wrong medicine." Reynolds did not turn around. He reached for the paper bag and pushed it farther down the counter, out of her reach, as if her concern were just another trick. "We'll sort that out at the station," he said. His tone was smooth, public, practiced, the kind of voice that made fear sound like procedure. Evelyn's fingers trembled, but she kept her shoulders straight. She had spent 38 years in emergency rooms where panic had a smell, where machines screamed, where mothers prayed into their palms, and she knew the difference between confusion and danger. This was danger. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind, hidden under labels, signatures, and people too afraid to admit a mistake. Claire stepped forward then, forcing a thin smile at the watching customers. "She became aggressive when we asked for payment," she said. Evelyn turned to her slowly. "No, ma'am. I asked why my blood pressure pills had a child's name on the bottle." A small sound passed through the pharmacy, not a gasp, not yet, but close. Reynolds' jaw tightened. Enough. He guided Evelyn away from the counter, firm but controlled, and the paper bag crinkled behind her like a warning nobody wanted to pick up. As they moved down the aisle, past vitamins and greeting cards and a cardboard stand advertising family wellness, Evelyn looked back one last time. The little boy was holding a second white bag in both hands. His mother was checking her phone, unaware. Evelyn stopped walking. "Don't let him take it," she called, her voice suddenly stronger than anyone expected. "Please, check his bottle before he takes it." Reynolds leaned closer, his words low enough for only her to hear. "You should worry about yourself right now." But Evelyn Carter had never been good at that. Not when someone else was in danger. Not when the truth was sitting in plain sight beneath bright pharmacy lights. And not when the people with power had mistaken her silence for weakness. Take 2 seconds to pause, press the subscribe button so you don't miss our exciting videos. And now, let's continue listening to the story unfold. Evelyn kept her eyes on the pharmacy window as Officer Reynolds guided her toward the patrol car, not because she was ashamed, but because she was trying to remember every detail. The boy in the red hoodie. The white paper bag in his mother's hand. Claire Whitmore standing behind the counter with one palm pressed flat against the register, as if holding herself together. The wrong label on the bottle. The dosage printed in black. The way no one moved fast enough when a child might have been in danger. Evelyn had learned long ago that emergencies did not always announce themselves with alarms. Sometimes they arrived quietly, wrapped in plastic, stapled to a receipt, handed across a counter by someone who wanted the line to keep moving. The morning air smelled of rain and exhaust. A delivery truck idled near the back entrance, its engine rattling against the brick wall. Evelyn's knees ached as she stepped off the curb, but she did not complain. Complaint had never done much for women like her. Work had. Patience had. Care had. For 38 years, she had worked the night shift at Mercy General Hospital, 12 hours at a time, sometimes more when storms filled the emergency room and half the staff could not make it in. She had held pressure on wounds, measured tiny doses for newborns, talked frightened fathers through paperwork, and once walked 3 miles home before sunrise because the buses had stopped running and her son needed lunch packed for school. Back then, Marcus Carter had been a skinny boy with serious eyes and shoes she polished on Saturday night so they would look newer on Monday morning. He used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while she soaked her feet in a plastic basin, asking questions no child his age should have known how to ask. Why do some people get listened to, Mama? Why do some people have to prove they are telling the truth twice? Evelyn never gave him bitter answers. She gave him steady ones. You become so prepared they cannot ignore you, baby. You keep your heart clean, but your mind sharp. That was how Marcus grew up, carrying library books under one arm and groceries under the other, watching his mother help neighbors who could never pay her back. When Mrs. Alvarez down the street broke her hip, Evelyn cooked for her. When Mr. Johnson's oxygen tank failed during a heat wave, Evelyn stayed beside him until the ambulance came. When a young white mother once rushed into Mercy General with a bleeding toddler in her arms, Evelyn did not ask where she was from or what she believed. She simply took the child, pressed calm into the room with her voice, and saved him before the doctor even arrived. Evelyn remembered that child sometimes. Pale hair stuck to his forehead. A small hand gripping her sleeve. A little plastic name band reading Mark Reynolds. But memory was a strange thing. It softened faces, blurred years, tucked pain and mercy into the same drawer. She had no reason to connect that boy to the officer opening the patrol car door in front of her now. To Reynolds, she was not a nurse, not a mother, not a woman whose hands had brought people back from the edge of losing everything. She was a problem to remove from a store. A report to write. A body to place in the back seat. Evelyn lowered herself carefully, her coat catching against the vinyl seat. Through the glass, the pharmacy looked smaller, colder, like a place pretending nothing had happened. Reynolds closed the door, and the sound landed with a heavy finality. Evelyn turned her face toward the gray sky and breathed slowly, counting the way she had taught frightened patients to count. In for 4. Hold for 2. Out for 6. Her chest felt tight, but her mind stayed clear. Somewhere inside that store, a child might still be holding the wrong medicine. Somewhere behind that counter, Claire knew more than she had said. And somewhere across the city, Marcus Carter was probably standing in a federal courthouse, unaware that the woman who taught him justice was being driven away for trying to protect a stranger. Officer Reynolds did not speak for the first 2 miles. He drove with one hand high on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the wet road ahead, while the radio murmured low bursts of codes and static from the dashboard. Evelyn sat behind the partition, watching streetlights slide across the window in pale yellow stripes. The city moved around them as if nothing had shifted. A school bus groaned at an intersection. A man in a rain jacket hurried across a crosswalk with coffee in one hand. A woman pushed a stroller beneath the awning of a bakery. Ordinary life continued, and that hurt more than Evelyn expected, because injustice always felt loud to the person inside it and strangely quiet to everyone else. Reynolds glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You should have just paid for what you wanted and left, he said. Evelyn turned her head slowly. I was trying to pay for what was mine. That is not what the manager said. Then the manager lied. His eyes narrowed in the mirror, but Evelyn did not look away. She did not say it sharply. She said it like a nurse reading a chart, like truth did not need decoration to stand upright. Reynolds looked back at the road. People do not call the police over nothing. Evelyn almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. People called the police over fear. Over pride. Over the kind of suspicion that could turn an old woman holding an insurance card into a threat before she had finished explaining herself. Claire Whitmore understood that. Claire had built a whole way of speaking around it. She never yelled. She never used ugly words in public. She simply lowered her voice, widened her eyes, and let men like Reynolds fill in the rest. Back at the pharmacy, she had looked polished enough to be believed. Pearl earrings. Pressed white coat. A silver name badge that caught the light each time she moved. Customers saw a responsible manager protecting her store. They did not see the way her fingers trembled when Evelyn noticed the wrong label. They did not see the half-open cabinet behind her where several white prescription bags sat stacked with outpatient names facing outward. They did not see the delivery driver at the back door waiting too long with a clipboard Claire refused to sign while people were watching. Evelyn saw all of it because Evelyn had spent her life seeing small things before they became tragedies. Reynolds saw none of it because he had stopped looking the moment Claire pointed. That was his power, and his weakness. At the station, the patrol car rolled beneath a concrete awning streaked with rainwater. The building was only 3 stories tall, brown brick with narrow windows, but it had the heavy feeling of a place where people learned to lower their voices. Reynolds opened the back door and helped Evelyn out with the same stiff politeness he had used in front of the pharmacy crowd. Inside, the air smelled of old coffee, floor cleaner, and paper warmed by copy machines. A few officers glanced up, then looked away. An elderly black woman in cuffs was not an emergency to them. It was paperwork. Behind the front desk, a young officer named Laura Bennett paused with a file in her hand. Her eyes moved from Evelyn's church hat to her pale lips to the careful way she held her shoulders. Something in Laura's expression changed, but she said nothing yet. Reynolds guided Evelyn toward a bench near the booking area. "Sit here." Evelyn lowered herself slowly. "My medication is still at the pharmacy," she said. "I need my prescription checked, and I need someone to call the child's mother." Reynolds exhaled as if patience were being taken from him by force. "You are still talking about that? Because it matters. What matters right now is whether you tried to walk out with medication you did not pay for." Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, past the uniform, past the badge, past the hard adult face. For one strange second, something about his eyes pulled at an old memory, a hospital hallway, a crying young mother, a little boy reaching for a sleeve. Then the memory slipped away beneath the cold light of the station. Reynolds turned to Laura and placed a form on the desk. "Process her for suspected theft and disturbance." Laura looked down at the form, then back at Evelyn. "Did the pharmacy provide video?" "They will send it." "Did anyone verify the prescription label?" Reynolds' mouth tightened. The manager gave a statement. Laura hesitated. It was a small hesitation, but Evelyn noticed it. So did Reynolds. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Laura lowered her eyes to the form. "No, sir." But as Reynolds walked toward the hallway, Laura kept watching Evelyn, and for the first time since the pharmacy doors slid open behind her, Evelyn felt that someone in the room might still know how to listen. The bench beneath Evelyn was hard plastic, cold enough to press through the fabric of her coat, but she sat upright with both feet together and her hands folded as neatly as the situation allowed. Across the room, a printer coughed out paperwork while officers moved in and out with paper cups, radios, and tired expressions. No one looked at her long. That was another kind of training the world gave people, the habit of not seeing what made them uncomfortable. Evelyn watched Reynolds through the glass wall of a side office. He was speaking to another officer, Blake Harris, a broad man with a shaved head and a coffee stain on his sleeve. Blake glanced toward Evelyn, smirked faintly, then looked at the form Reynolds handed him. Their voices were muffled, but their posture was clear. They had already placed her in a story, and now they were only filling in the blanks. Laura Bennett stood at the front desk, still holding the booking form. She tapped her pen twice, then turned toward Evelyn with careful steps. "Mrs. Carter," she said quietly, "are you feeling all right?" Evelyn took one slow breath. "My chest is tight, but I am steady." Laura's eyes dropped to Evelyn's wrist, where the skin showed a faint red line. "Do you need medical attention?" "What I need," Evelyn said, keeping her voice low, "is for someone to call Whitmore Pharmacy and make sure that little boy does not take the wrong pills." Laura glanced toward the office. Reynolds was still talking, his back turned. "You mentioned a child before. Red hoodie. Maybe 8 years old. His mother had a white pharmacy bag. The bottle that fell from my bag had his name on it. Daniel Price. Laura's pen stopped moving. You are sure about the name? I spent 38 years reading medication labels under worse lighting than that. I am sure. Laura swallowed, and for the first time, uncertainty broke through the professional mask on her face. Mrs. Carter, the manager said you became upset because your insurance card was declined. My card was declined because their system did not match the prescription they gave me. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her voice still gentle, but every word sharpened. By purpose. That was not my medicine. It was not my dosage. And if they gave that child something meant for a 74-year-old woman with heart problems, then every minute you spend processing me is a minute that child may not have. The sentence landed quietly, but it changed the air. Laura looked toward the office again. Reynolds stepped out before she could move. What is going on? He asked. Laura straightened. She is giving specific information about a possible medication mix-up involving a minor. Reynolds' mouth tightened. She is trying to redirect attention. Sir, she gave a name. People read names off counters all the time. Evelyn looked up at him then, not angry, not pleading. Officer Reynolds, you can dislike me. You can doubt me. You can write whatever you need to write. But call that mother. Blake Harris walked over, folding his arms. Ma'am, this is not how this works. Evelyn turned to him. Then how does it work? A store manager points, and an old woman becomes guilty before anyone checks a bottle. A child may be in danger, and the room debates my tone. The front desk fell quiet. A young officer carrying folders slowed near the copier. Laura lowered her pen. Reynolds' face hardened, but Evelyn could see it now, the small flicker beneath his control. He did not like being questioned, especially not by someone he had already decided was powerless. You need to stop talking, he said. Evelyn's voice dropped almost to a whisper. I stopped talking once in 1998, when a doctor dismissed a mother who said her baby was breathing wrong. 10 minutes later, that child turned blue. I promised God I would never stay quiet again when a child might be at risk. No one moved. Even Blake looked away first. Laura reached for the desk phone. Reynolds snapped his eyes toward her. Bennett. She paused, hand hovering over the receiver. The station seemed to hold its breath. Then Laura picked up the phone anyway. Whitmore Pharmacy, please, she said, her voice trembling only a little. Evelyn closed her eyes for 1 second, not in relief, not yet, but in prayer. She had crossed the invisible line they wanted her behind. She had spoken from the bench. Like she still had the right to be heard. And somewhere between the ringing phone and Reynolds' tightening jaw, the truth began pushing its way into the room. The call to Whitmore Pharmacy rang 7 times before anyone answered. Laura Bennett stood with the receiver pressed to her ear, her eyes fixed on the scratched surface of the front desk as if the answer might appear there before it came through the line. Evelyn sat motionless on the bench, every breath measured, every nerve in her body listening. Reynolds stood a few feet away with his arms folded, his expression flat, but the muscle near his jaw kept moving. Blake Harris leaned against the copier, pretending not to care. Whitmore Pharmacy, this is Claire, a voice finally said, bright and breathless. Laura straightened. This is Officer Bennett with the precinct. I need to confirm whether a customer named Daniel Price recently picked up a prescription. A pause. Not long, but long enough. Evelyn heard it even from the bench. We are very busy right now, Claire said. Is this about the woman Officer Reynolds removed? Laura looked at Reynolds, then turned slightly away. This is about a possible medication labeling issue involving a minor. On the other end, something shifted. Paper rustled. A drawer closed too quickly. There is no issue, Claire replied. The situation was handled. Evelyn opened her eyes. Her voice was weak, but clear. Ask her if Daniel's mother has left the store. Laura covered the receiver. Mrs. Carter says to ask whether the mother has left. Reynolds stepped forward. That is enough. Laura did not lower the phone. She repeated the question. Another pause. This time, Claire's answer came thinner. I cannot disclose patient information. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edge of her coat. Then ask her to look at the will call bin. Ask her if my name is on a bottle meant for Daniel. Laura repeated that too, and the room changed around the silence that followed. It was not dramatic. No one shouted. No alarm went off. But the quiet stretched so tightly that even Blake stopped shifting his weight. Claire came back on the line with a voice that tried to sound annoyed and failed. There may have been a temporary sorting error, but it was corrected. Evelyn closed her eyes again. A sorting error. 38 years of nursing had taught her that people use small words when the truth was too large to carry. Laura's face had gone pale. Was Daniel Price given medication intended for Evelyn Carter? No, Claire said too fast. Absolutely not. Then, faintly in the background, a woman's voice rose, frightened and sharp. Why does this bottle have my son's name on heart pills? Laura froze. Reynolds heard it. Blake heard it. Evelyn heard it, and the breath she had been holding left her in a slow, aching stream. Claire muffled the phone, but not quickly enough. There was more rustling, a child asking if he was in trouble, a mother demanding the pharmacist get over there now. Laura's voice hardened. Miss Whitmore, do not let that family leave. Do not alter any labels, bags, receipts, or video. An officer will be sent to secure the scene. Reynolds reached for the receiver. Bennett, hang up. Laura stepped back, still holding the phone. For the first time since Evelyn had entered the station, the young officer's fear had turned into something steadier. Sir, we may have a child safety issue and possible evidence tampering. Blake pushed off the copier. Careful. Laura looked at him, then at Reynolds. I am being careful. Evelyn tried to stand, but a tight pressure bloomed beneath her ribs, spreading into her shoulder like a slow storm. She gripped the bench, her face lowering for just a second. Laura saw it immediately. Mrs. Carter? Reynolds glanced over, impatience flashing across his face. Now she is performing. Evelyn lifted her head, and there was sweat along her temple. I am not performing, she whispered. I am trying to stay conscious. The words hit Laura harder than any argument. She set the receiver down without hanging up and hurried around the desk. She needs medical evaluation. Reynolds looked toward the hallway where the sergeant's office door sat half open. He knew what a medical call would do. It would create records. Timelines. Questions. Evelyn saw that calculation pass across his face, and it frightened her. More than the pain. Not because she thought he wanted harm done, but because he wanted the story to stay simple more than he wanted the truth to stay alive. Laura crouched in front of Evelyn. Do you have someone we can call? Evelyn nodded slowly. My son. What is his name? Evelyn reached for her purse, but her hands trembled too much to open it. Laura helped gently, pulling out a worn brown wallet. A photograph slipped free and landed face up on the floor. In it, Evelyn was younger, wearing blue scrubs outside Mercy General Hospital, holding a little white boy wrapped in a gray emergency blanket. Reynolds looked down by accident. His face changed before he could stop it. Laura picked up the photo and read the faded writing on the back. Mercy General, 1989. Mark Reynolds, age 6. The station became still again, but this time the silence had weight. Evelyn looked from the photograph to Reynolds, and the old memory finally came into focus. The pale hair. The frightened eyes. The tiny hand gripping her sleeve. Reynolds stared at the picture as if the floor had moved beneath him. Evelyn's voice was barely above a breath. That was you. For a few seconds, no one in the station seemed to know how to breathe. The photograph rested in Laura Bennett's hand, its corners soft from decades of being carried in Evelyn's wallet, its colors faded into the yellow warmth of another lifetime. In the picture, Evelyn was not an old woman on a plastic bench. She was younger, standing outside the emergency entrance of Mercy General Hospital, her blue scrubs wrinkled, her hair pulled back, her face tired but calm. In her arms was a little boy wrapped in a gray blanket, his cheek pressed against her shoulder, his small fingers curled into the fabric near her collar. Mark Reynolds stared at that child like he was looking at a stranger who had stolen his name. The station noise thinned around him. The radio still cracked softly. The copier still hummed. Someone's coffee cup clicked against a desk. But the sounds felt far away now, buried under the weight of the image. Evelyn watched his face change in pieces. First confusion. Then refusal. Then something deeper. Something that opened and hurt. "I was 6, Reynolds said, but the words came out uncertain, almost empty. Laura turned the photograph over again, reading the careful handwriting. Mercy General. November 14, 1989. Mark Reynolds, age 6. Highway 12 accident. Evelyn's eyes lowered, not from shame, but from memory. Your mother came in screaming your name, she said softly. The storm had knocked out power on 2 floors. We were running on backup lights. You were so cold you could barely speak. Reynolds stepped back once, as if the memory had reached for him. He had heard stories about that night his entire life. His mother said a nurse stayed past her shift. A nurse prayed with her. A nurse kept him awake by asking him about baseball cards and cartoons until the doctor arrived. He never knew her name. Or maybe he had known it once and let the years bury it. Evelyn pressed one hand lightly against her chest and drew another careful breath. Laura noticed and moved closer, but Evelyn lifted 2 fingers, asking for just a moment more. You kept asking whether your mama was mad at you, she said. I told you no child gets blamed for rain. Reynolds blinked, and the hard line of his mouth loosened. Blake Harris looked away toward the front doors, suddenly interested in nothing. The room had become too honest for him. Evelyn's pain had not left, it had settled into her like a stone warmed by the body. Still, her voice remained steady. I did not save you because you were white. I did not save you because your family had money. I saved you because you were a child and you needed help. Reynolds looked from the photograph to her wrists, to the bench, to the booking form still sitting on Laura's desk. The form looked different now. So did the station. So did his own hands. For years, he had worn authority like armor, believing it made him clear-eyed. But standing there, facing the woman who had once carried him through the worst night of his childhood, he felt how much that armor had blinded him. Laura knelt beside Evelyn and opened the wallet again. Mrs. Carter, is your son's number in here? Evelyn nodded toward a folded card behind her. Identification. Marcus Carter. It should say Department of Justice. Laura's fingers paused. She slid the card free. The seal on it caught the fluorescent light. United States Attorney Marcus D. Carter, Civil Rights Division Liaison. Laura looked up slowly. Reynolds saw the card at the same moment, and the color drained from his face in a way the photograph had not caused. This was no longer only memory. This was record, law, consequence, and a door opening somewhere far above his control. Laura reached for the desk phone again, but this time no one told her to stop. Evelyn leaned back against the bench, eyes closing briefly as her breathing grew shallow. Reynolds took one step forward, then stopped, unsure whether he had the right to come closer. The woman he had doubted, dismissed, and brought into the station like a problem had once held his life in her hands. Now her own hand trembled on her coat, and all he could do was stand there while the truth filled the room without raising its voice. Laura dialed the number on the card with hands that had become too careful, as if pressing the wrong button might break whatever truth had just entered the station. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and Evelyn listened with her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow but steady enough to keep fear from taking the room. Reynolds stood a few feet away, frozen between the photograph on the desk and the woman on the bench. For the first time since he had walked into Whitmore Pharmacy, he did not look powerful. He looked like a man who had opened an old door and found himself standing inside the worst version of his own life. On the 4th ring, a calm male voice answered. Marcus Carter. Laura straightened. Mr. Carter, this is Officer Laura Bennett calling from the precinct. I am with your mother, Evelyn Carter. The silence on the other end was immediate. Not empty. Controlled. What happened to my mother? Laura looked at Evelyn, then at Reynolds, then at the booking form that suddenly seemed too thin to hold the weight of the day. She was brought in after an incident at Whitmore Pharmacy. She is experiencing chest discomfort. Medical assistance is being requested now. Marcus's voice changed only slightly, but the temperature of the room seemed to drop. Has she been charged? Laura swallowed. Not formally. Was she given access to her medication? Laura did not answer fast enough. That was answer enough. Put me on speaker, Marcus said. Laura pressed the button and set the receiver on the desk. Evelyn opened her eyes when she heard her son's voice fill the station. Mama, do not say anything about the incident. Just breathe for me. Evelyn's lips trembled into the smallest smile. I am breathing, baby. Reynolds closed his eyes for 1 second. The word baby landed harder than any accusation could have. It made Evelyn a mother again, not a case, not a complaint, not a line on a report. Marcus continued, each word precise. Officer Bennett, I need emergency medical services called now. I need the name and badge number of the arresting officer. I need all body camera footage preserved. I need the pharmacy security footage requested and secured. And no one is to question my mother without counsel present. Blake Harris shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds looked toward the hallway, where a sergeant had stepped out after hearing the speakerphone. Laura answered, yes, sir. The sergeant walked closer, frowning. Who is this? Marcus replied before Laura could. Marcus Carter, United States Attorney's Office. I am also the son of the woman in your custody. The words moved through the station like a current through water. Heads lifted. Conversations thinned. A detective at the far desk slowly removed his glasses. The sergeant's expression tightened with recognition, then caution. Marcus was not only a name on a card. For the past 6 months, his office had been reviewing civil rights complaints across the county, including several involving traffic stops, pharmacy calls, and low-income patients accused of prescription fraud after insurance errors. Reynolds knew the investigation existed. Everyone in the building did. They had spoken about it in lowered voices, always as if it belonged somewhere else, to someone else, not to the old woman sitting beneath their fluorescent lights. Laura looked through the front windows. As flashing red lights reflected against the wet sidewalk. The ambulance had arrived. But behind it, turning sharply into the lot, came 2 black sport utility vehicles with federal plates. Reynolds stared at them, and the last bit of certainty left his face. Evelyn followed his gaze but said nothing. She did not look victorious. She looked tired. The kind of tired that came from surviving one more room where she had to prove she was human before anyone checked whether she was right. The station doors opened, bringing in the smell of rain and cold air. Marcus Carter stepped inside in a dark suit, tall, composed, his eyes finding his mother before they found anyone else. He crossed the room without rushing, but every step seemed to make the building smaller. He knelt in front of Evelyn, took her hand gently, and touched his forehead to her fingers for 1 quiet second. Then he stood, turned toward Reynolds, and looked at the badge on his chest. Officer Mark Reynolds, Marcus said, his voice low and even, before this goes any further, you should know my mother saved your life once. Today, she may have saved a child's life too. The question is whether this department tried to stop her from doing it. Marcus did not raise his voice, and somehow that made the room more uncomfortable. Loud anger could be dismissed as emotion, but his calm moved with the weight of a sealed court order. 2 federal investigators entered behind him, one carrying a slim laptop case, the other speaking quietly into a phone while noting badge numbers from the wall. The sergeant tried to recover his authority, smoothing one hand down the front of his uniform. Mr. Carter, we are still gathering facts. Marcus looked at the booking form on Laura's desk. Then gather all of them. The paramedics reached Evelyn first, a woman with kind eyes and a man carrying a medical bag. Evelyn tried to wave them off, but Marcus crouched beside her again. Mama, let them check you. She sighed, the way mothers sigh when their grown children are right but they do not want to admit it. The paramedic wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm, and the soft hiss of the monitor filled the silence. Reynolds stood near the office door, hands at his sides, staring at the old photograph Laura had placed on the desk. He had not touched it. He looked afraid to. One investigator asked for his body camera. Reynolds blinked. It is uploading through the system. Then we will preserve the original file, the investigator said. Blake Harris shifted toward the hallway, but the second investigator stopped him with a polite hand gesture. Officer Harris, please remain available. Every word was civil. Every word closed a door. Then Laura's desk phone rang again. She answered, listened, and her face tightened. "It is the officer at the pharmacy," she said. "Daniel Price is safe." His mother had not given him the medication yet. The bottle in his bag was mislabeled. "The pharmacy is being secured." Evelyn closed her eyes, and this time relief moved across her face like warm light through curtains. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. Marcus stood very still. Was there only one mislabeled bottle? Laura listened again, then repeated the question. Her eyes lifted slowly. No. They found multiple bags with mismatched patient names. Some labels had been peeled and reprinted. Claire Whitmore's polished voice, her pale face, the drawer closing too fast, the delivery driver waiting at the back entrance, all of it returned to Evelyn in pieces. Marcus turned to his investigator. "Contact the State Pharmacy Board, Medicaid Fraud Unit, and County Health Department. I want inventory logs, insurance billing records, surveillance video, and every complaint made against that location in the last 2 years." The sergeant's shoulders dropped slightly. This was no longer a misunderstanding inside his building. It was widening, gathering names, documents, agencies, timelines. Reynolds finally spoke, but his voice had lost its edge. "I did not know about the pharmacy." Marcus looked at him. "You did not have to know everything. You only had to check before deciding she was lying." Reynolds swallowed. His eyes moved to Evelyn, who sat with a sensor clipped gently to her finger, the red light pulsing at the tip like a small, steady heart. "Mrs. Carter," he began, then stopped. Words failed him. Because apology was too small for what had happened and too late to erase the way he had chosen not to see her. Evelyn opened her eyes. She looked at him for a long moment, past the badge, past the uniform, past the boy in the photograph and the man he had become. "Mark," she said softly, and his face tightened at the sound of his first name in her voice. "When you were little, you were scared. I helped you because somebody had to be gentle in a hard moment. Today, I was scared too." Reynolds looked down. "I am sorry." Evelyn nodded once, not accepting everything, not dismissing anything, simply letting the truth stand between them without decoration. "Sorry is where a man starts," she said. "It is not where he stops." No one spoke after that. The sergeant ordered Reynolds placed on administrative leave pending review. Blake Harris was instructed to surrender his report notes. Laura quietly handed Marcus the photograph, but Evelyn reached for it first. Her fingers closed around the faded image with surprising strength. The paramedic asked if she could walk to the ambulance for further evaluation. Marcus offered his arm. Evelyn took it, rising slowly. As she passed Reynolds, he stepped aside, no longer blocking her path, no longer shaping the room around his authority. Outside, the rain had stopped. The pavement shone silver beneath the afternoon light. Behind them, phones rang, printers started, and the machinery of consequence finally began to move. Evelyn did not look back at the station. Her eyes were on the open ambulance doors, on her son's hand beneath hers, and on the quiet knowledge that the child at the pharmacy would go home safe because she had refused to be silent. 3 weeks later, the sign above Whitmore Pharmacy was gone. In its place, a plain white banner hung across the front windows, announcing temporary closure by order of the State Pharmacy Board. The glass doors that had once slid open for Evelyn Carter now stayed locked, reflecting the quiet street, the passing cars, and the people who slowed down to read the notice taped at eye level. Claire Whitmore had been charged with insurance fraud, reckless endangerment, and falsifying prescription records after investigators found months of mislabeled medications, altered billing forms, and complaints that had been ignored because most of the customers were poor, elderly, or too afraid to challenge a place they depended on. Daniel Price was safe. His mother sent Evelyn a handwritten card with a crayon drawing tucked inside, a little boy in a red hoodie standing beside an old woman in a blue hat, both smiling beneath a yellow sun. Evelyn kept it on her kitchen table beside her pill organizer and her Bible. Officer Blake Harris resigned before the internal review finished. Mark Reynolds lost his badge, but not in the loud way people expected. There was no dramatic speech, no television moment, no shouting in a courthouse hallway. He sat before the review board with the old photograph on the table in front of him and admitted that he had made assumptions before he had facts. He admitted that Evelyn's age, race, and quiet voice had made him see weakness where there was warning. For the first time, he did not defend the shape of his mistake. He named it. That did not erase what he had done, but it began the part that punishment alone could not reach. Months later, a small community health clinic opened 2 blocks from the old pharmacy, funded by fines from the investigation and private donations Marcus helped secure. On the wall near the waiting room hung a framed photograph of Evelyn in her nursing uniform from 1989, holding a frightened little boy wrapped in a gray blanket. Beneath it, in simple black letters, were the words, "Kindness is not weakness. It is strength." Evelyn did not want the picture there at first. She said people did not need to make a hero out of a woman who had only done her job. Marcus smiled and told her that sometimes the world needed to see what quiet courage looked like, especially when it came in soft shoes, silver curls, and a church coat that smelled faintly of lavender. On the clinic's first morning, Evelyn arrived early. The sky was pale blue, the sidewalk still damp from overnight rain, and the air carried the clean smell of spring grass from a nearby schoolyard. Marcus walked beside her, not because she needed help every step, but because he liked being close enough to offer it. Inside, Daniel Price and his mother were already waiting with flowers. Laura Bennett was there too, no longer hiding her conscience behind procedure. She had transferred to community outreach and was helping design training on medical calls, elder care, and racial bias. Near the doorway stood Mark Reynolds in plain clothes, holding a small bouquet of white daisies. He did not approach at first. He only stood there, uncertain, his face older than it had looked in uniform. Evelyn saw him and paused. The room watched without meaning to. Reynolds lowered his eyes. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I know I cannot ask you to forget." Evelyn looked at the flowers, then at the men who had once been a terrified child in her arms and later became a men who forgot how to see people clearly. "No," she said gently. "You cannot." His shoulders sank. Then Evelyn reached out and took one daisy from the bouquet. "But you can remember better from now on." Reynolds nodded, and for the first time, the silence between them did not feel like shame alone. It felt like a door left open, not wide, but enough for a man to choose whether he would walk through changed. Evelyn turned toward the clinic hallway, where the first patients were being called by name, not by suspicion, not by fear, not by what anyone assumed they were worth. Marcus offered his arm again. This time she did not take it. She patted his hand, smiled, and walked forward on her own. The morning light followed her across the floor, soft and steady, touching the chairs, the check-in desk, the photograph on the wall, and the small line of people waiting to be treated with dignity. Justice had not arrived with thunder. It had arrived through one woman who refused to stay silent when a child was in danger, one officer who chose to listen before it was too late, and one son who understood that the law means nothing if it cannot protect the vulnerable. And maybe that is the question this story leaves behind. When the world misjudges someone standing right in front of us, will we follow the crowd, or will we stop long enough to see the truth?